Demonic Angel, and today I just wanted to talk a little bit more about a subject that I was discussing recently with a subscriber who's kind of become a good friend of mine from Germany, and we do emails and throw some thoughts back and forth. So it's one of those friendships where it's just really awesome conversation, and that's what I'm all about. So basically the subject of some Buddhist ideas and concepts came up, and I thought, well, I'll do a video on kind of expanding on the idea of what is the Bardo, because I've touched on it briefly, that the Bardo is a Buddhist concept of the time between when you die and the time between until you're born. So it's a reincarnation idea, and what happens in that process of the in-between. So it really, Bardo is in between, and it's not just, to be clear, according to Buddhism, it's not just the time between death and the next rebirth, but there's actually, according to Tibetan Buddhism, now Tibetan Buddhism, from that we get the highly revered, it's actually an excellent read, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and it's essentially instructions for like the newly dead. If you've ever seen that movie Beetlejuice, where the ghosts pick up a book and it's like something like instructions for being newly dead, like they need a handbook explaining it to them. That's what this is. I think it's written in the 1400s, and it's trying to walk the dead through this whole process of the Bardo, the in-between state. So a good part of the Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about the Bardo. And there's 6 different actual Bardos. So one obviously being what I just mentioned. The other is like when you dream. Now you can get really technical and look these up. I'll post some links, so feel free to do some reading if you like that kind of thing. But like when you're dreaming, so in between you're sleeping at night and the next day, that is a Bardo. That's the in between, because that kind of matches up with some occult ideas of traveling out of the body to the astral plane when we dream, and that, which is pretty much what I say, matches up with what I experience. And then we leave these cords of attachment to our body, and that's how we get back to them. But most people of course don't think of it in such what can I say, a flamboyant, dramatic way, but that is traveling. It's traveling to this other dimension. And when I'm interested in Buddhism essentially because it really does explain and match up with a lot of things that I experience. Like I say, okay, I have all these experiences of I used to see ghosts as being outside of myself, right? But now I can tune into this whenever I want, and I can really best describe it as an altered state of consciousness. And that's, but an altered state of consciousness also means having access to another dimension of reality. So in other words, it's always there, but we just don't, most of the time, we don't choose to perceive it. So, another one is, another Bardo is when you meditate. Now, what I want to talk about for meditation is I think that there's a perception in the Western culture that meditation's primary intention is to focus the mind and induce relaxation. And that really is very important, because without that idea of kind of looking at the mind and inducing relaxation without drugs, without in this natural way, is very important to probably experiencing these other things. But the reason that Tibetan Buddhists do this is because they're trying to prepare for death, essentially. Because the idea, which is kind of how I describe it, is that when we are dead, all that is left is our minds. So when all that is left is just your mind, and you don't have this body to be in, then it would be very, very confusing. Now, it be based on your culture. So if you're born into a culture that believes in reincarnation and you practice meditation, then it wouldn't be such a shocking experience. But for most Western people who either believe in Christianity, Judaism, or are agnostic atheists, in the sense of just not really putting too much focus on that kind of spiritual aspect, that would be very, very shocking. And then what happens is then you fail to recognize this experience for what it is, and you become attached to essentially your lower karma, the things you regret, the things you wish you had done, property, the things that we kind of think, that ghosts attach themselves to. Property, people. This is because in some way there's that failure to recognize that now you're dead, you don't have to be attached to these kinds of things. And it's really like this too. I was talking to a guy a few years ago. I went on an investigation, which I'm hoping 2021 for sure, as some of the vaccines and people were able to go back out into society a little bit more, that I can go on investigations and bring my camera along. But this guy, he just got real defensive, like at the end of me talking about some guy being trapped at his house. And he was like, no, I need him to be here with me. He's supposed to look out for me. He's my best friend and all this stuff. And I was finally like, okay, that's fine. But you need to give the spirit of this person a choice. You're holding this person, in other words, they're bound through your pain and not by this choice, because ascendancy hasn't happened. So, in other words, the dead person in that case did not have that choice to fully recognize that he was dead. He was just being pulled back to pain and confusion, because he did not, because he was just basically experiencing his friends crying and pain for him. And so that's not what anybody really wants, I don't think. We don't want loved ones to be in pain. But it's just really an example of what I believe is that and Buddhism teaches, is that basically what is left when you're dead is just your mind. And so that's one of the things I want to say, is that a really big point of meditation is preparing oneself for death, for travel into the astral plane, so that you're not so freaked out that you attach yourself to negative things, and then you become a hungry ghost due to those attachments. It's called preta. I think I'm pronouncing it right. And those are those paintings. If you got, I'll do a link in the description. So there's a lot of Buddhist paintings of these ugly creatures that have swollen bellies, and that's a hungry ghost. I've talked about those. But because the mind doesn't have a body, there's no satiating any kind of addiction, hunger, craving, real connection. That's what I'm saying. That's why the astral plane needs to be physical, and so they're just always in this state of confusion, hunger, and even when I meet ghosts that they want to stay on their property because they're one case it's just a dead guy and his wife, and they just want to be on their property. So that's not such a negative situation, right? I mean, not really, you know, like they could be there for a while. They have chosen to have that experience, but they're going to have to move on. They don't belong here. They're not here in the physical plane anymore. And essentially the only way back or out of the situation for hungry ghosts is back. And to do that, they sort of have to go into that whole, another idea that matches up with what we think is going into the light. And that's kind of what I'm getting at in a little bit. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about meditation and, you know, some of the other ideas that go along with that, besides, you know, to experience the astral plane, you have to be relaxed while you're alive. And then we have the fourth Bardo, which they say happens at the moment of death. But this is kind of where it's like if we have a situation where somebody has a terminal illness and they know that they're going to die, or even through many cultures, different things that say that, you know, let's say your cousin goes and gets in a plane crash and dies. And before that, you're like, gosh, I had those bad dreams. Let's say you saw an owl, and in your culture, that's like a death omen. So that whole experience of the death bardo is taking place. It begins then, and then it continues till after you're dead. Now, I think that in traditional kinds of Buddhist ideas of this, that it's supposed to last 49 days, the bardo of after death. Now, that really matches up with some other concepts that I'm interested in. One is Navajos, they're Native Americans, and they believe in something called chindi, which is that when a person dies, you want to leave the windows open for a period of time so that their spirit can escape, because for a period of time after their death, something like a month, like with Buddhism, that what happens is what's good with a person, you know, ascends and it moves on, and it's kind of similar, like that aspect of them is moving on for reincarnation. But the negative things, the addictions, hunger, anger, that remains behind. So if you don't open a window, the spirit can't leave, and then you have a hungry ghost. And what happens in that situation is the living occupants of the house get something called ghost sickness. So they become literally sick from, basically it's from being around dead energy all the time. And that translates into nightmares and really thinking about graphic imagery about death, kind of can translate into suicidal ideation. But the idea is that sickness takes place, and to cure that, they do they have a medicine person perform a sing, which is what it sounds like, you know, where they pray and sing and chant and fast for this person, and the singing is the most important aspect, because that rids it basically severs the tie of the dead chindi from the living person who is afflicted with what they call ghost sickness. And that's why when I speak with lots of people, and I go to haunted locations, and my problem with some of that is that like when people go to sleep at night, that dead people, no, they can have a range of intentions. They could just be confused and not know that they're dead. And they can be sick. Let's just say they're sick and they're not, they really just, because of drugs and chemotherapy, they're really unaware that they're dead. They don't remember that experience. So they're just going to sit by that person at night, and while the living person is dreaming, and the body is basically vacant, they're feeding off of that energy, and what's happening as the living person is then absorbing some of that sickness from, the person who had like a cancer, like I mentioned. And so it's just not plain good for us as living people to spend a lot of time around the dead. Now there's all kinds of exceptions. There really are. And there's places, there's ghosts that I've met that I would not mind having them around me, because their function is different. They're really aware. They just want to spend some more time at their property. I don't have a problem with that. That's not hurting me. But what I'm saying is these kinds of situations that are more common, where a ghost is confused, and obviously they don't eat anymore, so what they have to do to get energy is from people. Now they also, as you guys know, they get it from batteries and electronics, but that's a thing. So it's just really interesting to talk about some of those concepts that match up in different cultures. Very fascinating for me looking at that, because it just kind of lights a fire in my soul, and I can compare it to what I experience and kind of apply what makes sense to me. And I think that's pretty understandable. But in any case, the fifth Bardo is basically after you have that experience of, okay, you're dead, and that last final breath has taken place. There's basically this. Now, one of the things is also that, like, let's say a person. This happened to my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, biological grandfather. He got dementia the last 6 months of his life in his 90s, and he passed away very, very quickly thereafter. But right before he got dementia, he just kind of lost interest in things, and he stopped eating. He could be made to eat. He was in a nursing home, but not for very long. Once again, maybe 18 months. He lived alone because he outlived all of his wives and everything. And so he quit eating. That is basically the fire element, that hunger that connects us to the physical plane. And sometimes when we're just ready to die, if we're old, that kind of that fire element within us, it just stops working, and this is the process of that breakdown. So, once again, that is part of the Bardo of this whole death experience that's kind of happening at the end of life. And with this fifth Bardo, this is where there's just, okay, in Western culture we think of, people die and they're supposed to see a bright white light, and we tell ghosts to go to the light, and then the house is never haunted again, right? Very popular idea. Well, after this whole experience of death has happened, what happens is an unconsciousness, okay? so that after death, this is why most people don't remember their last lives. It's a series of unconsciousnesses, but the right after death that happens, there's just nothing. And part of that meditation is to train people to understand that there's going to be a period of just nothing. And then there's periods of seeing this white light, hearing high-pitched noises. When you basically wake up, let's, explain it that way. And then what happens is, typically, the person will go through this period of, as they talk about, 49 days, where they're thinking about their attachments, regrets, their family, and so they're, it's talking about explaining this in visions after this period of unconsciousness. And it's supposed to be a feeling of, people say, near-death experiences, profound peace, and this awareness that that a lot of souls experience as kind of a moment in time of just complete and absolutely complete peace, and that they can't believe that there's this level of awareness, and why would I ever want to go and reincarnate? This is so much more real than real life. I wish I could stay here forever. But it's just another experience. It's just another moment in time, and it's a step on the journey back to the physical world. But it's a very important one. So that can mean lots of things, though. That peace is really usually, as far as when we look at Buddhism, that's attained after people look at things about their lives. So it is kind of like in the astral plane, when people are thinking these things, whatever they think happens for them in their mind very vividly. So they die in New York, but their mom's in Los Angeles, okay? So they think about their mom in Los Angeles, and they have that experience like it's very real, where you think you're newly dead, you think about meeting your grandparents, and you have that experience because it's important to you, and it seems more real than this life. But then you're also going to confront the, whatever the shameful things, and we all have that, the things we regret, and it's also why it's very important to try to work those things out while we're alive, if we're able to, because then we will actually be able to, apply that to ourselves and say, I did this, it was so wrong, I'm so ashamed. But you know what, I really I'm a former alcoholic, and what I can take with me is that, and I know I have been for a lot of, I was in my last life, but I just didn't quit when I was young, and I did now, and I get to keep that, and it matters. It's a hard fight. And so, although there is that confrontation, so, with myself, there's also those things that we do that make up for them. You have a fight with your parents, you make up, and it really matters. It really is good stuff here when we do that here on Earth. It matters so much, it makes me want to cry and shit. I just get emotional because it's just so great to have that, because we can have that experience on the astral plane, but it just counts for so much more when it's here. And so it's really just another thing to think about. That it's and one of the things too is that it's like for Buddhism, this is like a level of just hearing things as they really are. And if we think about that, they say when people are dying that the last of their senses to go is hearing. So the first thing, you don't really ever lose your hearing, except for that brief moment of unconsciousness that where, nothing exists. And meditation really is that nothingness, so that prepares us for that. And the first thing that we're aware of is that awakening of hearing sounds. Now, if you have this experience of being out of your body, and let's say, you know, instead of seeing a white light and reuniting with your grandparents, thinking about the good things that you've done to try to make up for the bad in your life, you're just fucking angry because you died too young. You're just really angry, and that's just what you think about, and you just keep. That's all that is your mind. You're having it, and even in Buddhism, they do say that this is like hallucinatory experiences, and I do, you know, the dead they're basically hallucinating, except for when they, in the rare cases, which is the phenomena we're largely interested in, become ghosts and they're attached to the physical plane. Then it's not so much a hallucination anymore. But so that anger I was mentioning in that situation, that hallucination of anger just carries that person. And so they become attracted to the being born into a situation where it can be so many different scenarios. They can be born to rich parents, so they can just continue to be angry at everybody. They could be born poor with nothing, so now they're just, and as they grow up, they're just left with a sense of anger, and they're not really sure why they're angry, but they know they are. And hopefully while they're alive that time, they can work some of that out, but that really carries them. And so that if people experiencing the white light don't see it for what it is on some level, they may think of it in terms of, when we talk about Christianity, in terms of heaven. They may see it, but in terms of karma. But the idea is, as explained by Buddhism, that these are projections of our own mind. They're projections of our karma. And if we don't realize that it's, as I mentioned, generated by ourselves from when we were alive, then we become, like in the case of anger, you're misplacing anger and you're just angry. But you're not kind of realizing anger for what its real name is, which is sadness, right? After you're angry for a while, you ever just get really sad? That's what really that is. And that it generates, it comes from you, and the loss, of course, in that case would be that you died young. It's very sad. It's an acknowledgement of that. But if you're just angry, then that is a failure to recognize that projection is coming from within you, and you become attached to that anger in your next life very, very strongly. And also the important thing is you do it without remembering. Now most people don't remember their last life anyway, but you do it without acknowledging that coming from with you. So then it creates a lot of mental, it can translate into things like mental illness, angry teenagers, starting off doing drugs because they're already angry kids, and that kind of a thing. And a lot of times people do end up, they own their anger and they resolve some issues and everything, and that's what is needed to happen. But the final Bardo is basically where the consciousness is preparing to be born again. So there's these different levels of reincarnation. Now, when we talk about hungry ghosts, you know, they're kind of these uglier looking monsters in Buddhism, whereas in Western culture we think of them as people like looking things. I've seen both. They are, they all exist, and if a person is not owning their projection, as I mentioned, they can be reborn into this realm of hungry ghosts. And for this period of time, it's almost like hell. It's almost like a temporary hell. And, you know, and then they're this hungry ghost for a period of time until they're able to move on. Or if something is done so badly, there's also hell in Buddhism, but it's temporary. And so, you know, you can be reborn into hell. And it's kind of like an idea of Dante's Inferno in a sense of, you know, if you just, it's even more dramatic and graphic, actually. It's like if you were a sex addict in this life, and of course all these failures of acknowledgement, then in the next life, then you're going to, in hell, you're just going to have like continuous orgies or something, except it's like you would do that as insects, crawling insects, and you wouldn't have a choice to stop, and you wouldn't have it would be endless pain, endless pain for that experience, and eventually that experience translates into being born into a different realm until eventually you could work, you know, your way up into being born into basically what we are. We're born in the physical realm, and there's realms above us. If you choose to ascend, if you're aware, I guess, which is, since I remember my last life, I could have chosen to just have done that, but I really have had, still do. I have a lot of things to work out, so that wasn't gonna be something I could do in that way. But I also am here to share knowledge and stories and everything like that. But you know, these are ideas like ascended masters, and you know, in Viking culture we have like the Aesir and the 9 worlds, and you could be born into a realm like that that's just of a higher pure consciousness. If you want to stay, so in other words, even according to Buddhism, if you want to stay in the white light and you know, this peaceful experience, you can choose to do that for X amount of time, really. But my philosophy, my personal philosophy, is that you will eventually, consciousness, all these different things, we you know, I know I'm kind of like, you know, talking about Satanism, because it's kind of a thing that's emotionally attractive to me, but at the same time, Satanism, God, Buddha, Allah, Kokopele, President Marbus, they're all from the one thing, the great consciousness. And what all those things have in common, what they want, is subjective experience. Because, you know, being out there on the astral plane, you can only do so much. But they do all these functions we think of them as, right? Guardian angels, demons of health, personal demons of people's nightmares. They all kind of exist on these other realms that really could be sincerely described as an altered state of consciousness. And I'll probably end this, like, you know, little video by saying that it's, you know, and I'll put some links, so if you want to do some reading, feel free. That it's, when I say altered state of consciousness, it really is like, let's just say that there's a historic home, okay, and there's a Victorian era ghosts, and they're still, you know, they've got their issues that tie them to the physical plane, so they're still there. And half of the people who work, at this place, they believe in it, that, they've experienced phenomena, and the other half don't. A lot of that has to do with perception and, being open. And so you're really going to see what you kind of choose to see. And I choose to keep this open for me. I mean, I really want to function very well in the logical, rational world. It's very important. But this world is really real. It's just as real, if not more, than than what we're just seeing, what we are presented as of reality. And those ghosts, they exist. They're there. But some people, they just are not going to choose to see that. And that also means that they don't have access to like messages from angels, messages from loved ones. They don't perceive things in that way, but it's there. So, I think an awareness to this, it's really great because it is kind of an expanding on what is really there. You could certainly live with a ghost and never know it because it's not in your perception. And you can choose. We do it all the time. Like, let's say your partner's mad because of work, and whatever, you just don't perceive that because you're in a good mood. We choose what we're picking up on all the time, and it doesn't mean that other things like aren't happening. It's just I would really describe it that way. Like, I could tune that out. I can tune the astral plane out. I can't stay up all night and talk to ghosts all the time. I would never want that. So there's a level of all right, I'm going to tune that out and go play video games or whatever. I'm going to go do homework. But then, there's also times where I just want to have access to that. And it's really easy for me to do that because I believe. And of course, there's a level that it doesn't matter what you believe. There's just some places, some ghosts, some experiences that you don't have to believe anything. And you experience it, and you will. But perception is definitely a huge part of it, and it's also why some people don't experience. They only experience the physical plane. And, throughout these lifetimes of reincarnation, they only do. They don't think of the white light as this transcendental consciousness and a chance to own projections and things like that. They don't choose the direction of how they're reborn. But if you're aware of what's happening, which is obviously what I believe happened to me, and I kind of had that experience of death personified, then you could choose how you want to be reborn. You can choose your attachment. And that's not, wouldn't you want to be back with your family or and some people wouldn't, and in that case you can choose that as well. But so and there's not a right or a wrong thing in this kind of way. It's just that some people would just experience endless lifetimes, and their projections that they experience in the Bardos state, they just think they're dreaming, and then they forget all about it, and they're born again, and they got the same type of base personality though, don't they? And then they just carry on. But then some people, me and you subscribers, they just kind of know that there's something beyond the physical world, and it's just as valuable. I hope you enjoyed my really long talk today. I'll probably only do one more video, and then I'm going to do a little presentation on the next goetic demon, before I do the sigil drawing video. So I'll see you guys for the next video.